in Portland, and that's up till the end of the month. So
yes,
you have an opportunity to check that out. It's a really beautiful space and great group of artists. So please join me in welcoming Victoria.
Thank you, Amanda. Is this volume okay for everybody? Okay. And thank you to the University of Oregon Art Department also for having me here and welcoming me. Just get this started. Just be patient with me for a minute while I get the first image up. Okay. So it's great to be here in Eugene. This is the first stop of what I'm loosely referring to as my West Coast tour. Next week I'll be part of a conversation in Portland at the Lumber Room, which Amanda just mentioned. We're doing a walkthrough of the show, and all the artists will be at the show on Saturday the 21st to discuss their work. And in between this and that, I'm headed to Los Angeles for a quick research trip. I've been wanting to get down there. I'm calling it a West Coast tour because I was thinking about it and in my past. And in Seattle in the late 80s, when most of my friends, or many of my friends, were in their first bands, we used to laugh at the way they would call it a tour if they played, more than one show. For instance, if they played Olympia and Portland before heading back home, that was their West Coast tour. So 20 plus years later, I guess this is sort of my West Coast tour, and I'm feeling very proud of myself that I made it all the way to Eugene today. So in my preparations for tonight, and in particular, or especially since I'm heading down to Los Angeles, where I plan to see as many shows as possible that are connected to the Pacific Standard Time group of shows. I don't know if you're familiar with it, but it's throughout all of LA. It's a year-long sequence of exhibitions, actually Los Angeles and the surrounding area, basically showing the work of Los Angeles artists or California artists from 1945 to 1980, and essentially trying to put them on the map. So in preparation for that, I've been rereading the incredible book that I'm sure many of you are familiar with about California artist Robert Irwin, called Seeing is Forgetting, the name of the thing one sees. So for those of you who aren't familiar, I think it's hands down the best book ever written about the practice of being an artist. In it, the author, Lawrence Weschler, describes Irwin's process in a captivating story that makes you feel like you're privy to the secrets of actually how to be an artist. And it's been very inspiring for me and many other artists who are interested in that, the practice of being an artist. The gist of it, I believe, is this. In the world of creating, curiosity always trumps ambition. And in Irwin's case, the curiosity is manifested in a relentless questioning of material, perception, and process. So, although it will probably be easier for me to continue talking about somebody else's work, I thought I'd try to be brave and attempt to discuss my own relationship to these same questions of material and perception and process. The first thing that I should tell you is that I did receive my BFA from the University of Washington, almost or a little more than 20 years ago. But I've had a very complicated relationship with painting, and that has led to a somewhat complicated relationship with sculpture. The exciting thing about this is that in my frustration to kind of explore both of those dimensions, I discovered a world full of possibilities and just had like rich complexities within those 2 and 3 dimensions, and I call it, dimension 2.5. So this brings me to my first image. I am paying attention. This pretty much sums up my philosophy and approach to making art. It's a 10-foot bar of cold rolled steel forged into a sentence and dipped in white plastic, like the kind that you get at the hardware store that you would dip your tools into. It comes in different colors, but I wanted it to evoke the quality of neon, or have that kind of texture without actually transmitting light. I consider it my artist statement as it describes succinctly many aspects of art making that are meaningful to me. It operates as a line drawing that's somewhere between 2 and 3 dimensions. It's a title for a show and a title of a piece, as well as the piece itself. And it places itself in the continuum of contemporary art as a response to Bruce Naumann's famous print that advises us sternly to pay attention. It also implicates the viewer in the act of viewing. Just reading it is to comply with its request or demand. I've spent, so I thought I'd talk about the things that I do pay attention to in terms of my life and my art making, and those things, of course, are completely intertwined. I've spent a lot of time observing and absorbing and reacting to my primary physical geography, which is Seattle, Washington. And I'm sure most of you know that it's sandwiched between 2 mountain ranges, the Cascades to the east and the Olympics, these ones, to the west across Puget Sound. And on a clear day, like today, Mount Rainier chimes in from the south. This landscape has had a profound effect on me, and I've tried to make sense of both the feeling of comfort I get from it, but also deal with its more oppressive qualities, the qualities that sometimes familiarity breeds. It can be comforting, and at times it can be stifling. So these drawings were inspired by my landscape, and I'm just going to show you a few images of linear drawings, or these drawings of ink on paper. In this case, I'm trying to capture that sort of bulkhead or wall that the Olympics projects, like on someone in the city looking out at it, as well as the more conceptual, mysterious quality of imaginary and also specific places like Twin Peaks. This one's made with fake wood grain contact paper, adhered to an archival, higher quality paper. These were made in the early 2000s as I became reunited with my native landscape in Seattle. So I just thought I'd start out with those just to give you this sense. I've always considered myself, almost no matter what kind of work I've been making, it always comes back to my relationship with my landscape, whether it's a relationship of dealing specifically with structures in my landscape, or man-made structures, or natural formations. I feel like that's always been what I've looked toward, rather than somebody who might veer toward figurative work, for instance. So I guess I should back up a bit. Oh, that's a detail of the wood grain. In terms of saying that I made those mountain linear drawings when I returned returned to Seattle, and I returned to Seattle from London. In the late 90s, in a sort of 7-year itch moment of feeling like I needed to get the hell out of town, and to kind of disorient myself from the surroundings that had become a little too familiar, I decided I needed a change of scenery, and opportunity struck in the form of grad school. It was actually somewhat of an accident. I was visiting a friend because I lived in London before, and he was going to Goldsmiths and was so excited about it that he had me meet him there, and I sort of was infected with his enthusiasm and found myself kind of haphazardly having an interview while I was there and actually getting in. So I took it as a sign that I should go. So I packed my bags, and for the second time in my life, I moved to London. So I talked about wanting a change of scenery. I forgot, even though I'd lived there before, that other than the fact that it's in Europe and people speak differently, there's a lot of similarities in terms of rain and weather. So I wasn't branching out latitude-wise. It was here that I sort of started over from scratch as far as my art was concerned. Up until that point, I'd been a painter's painter, kind of thick impasto paint on large panels or canvas, and in the style of, I always thought, like especially in the late 90s or mid-90s, I always felt no matter what I painted that it ended up looking like a really bad version of a Ross Bleckner painting. So I fortunately don't have any images of that period to show you. But I arrived at Goldsmiths College, Center of Young British Artists Universe, a.k.a. Damien Hirst and Friends, and was all ready to become a sculptor because I'd been drawing these forms and painting these forms in a way that suggested I was trying to branch out of this two-dimensional format. I didn't really have much more in the way of art supplies than a hammer and some pencils. I discarded all my paint supplies in a commitment to my new pursuit. But that didn't really matter. That I didn't have any materials because nobody else did either. London was so expensive that it soon became clear that, like most art students, just used garbage or free stuff to make their work, so that's what I did. And in the West African street malls of Peckham Rye, where I lived near the college, I had this sort of moment where, I was wondering what I was going to make and what I was going to do and how I was going to shake things up. And I ended up buying a whole bunch of black rubber bands from a hair salon that specialized or catered to people that were, making hundreds and hundreds of braids on their head. And so I had bought all these little packages of black rubber bands, and line by line, I began to build my work back up. And so I'd since I'd been creating these forms in paint and wasn't satisfied, the switch to rubber bands really, and their connection with the wall, and just using nails and whatever, the most simplest materials, and connecting with the architecture of the building, really allowed these works to breathe in a way that I'd been yearning for. I was able to ask more difficult questions, like how far could I push something until it disappeared, or simple questions like, can a shadow be as important a material as a material itself? So this is what happened after those initial foray into really taking my work off the page and onto the wall. It seemed like the forms themselves wanted to proliferate. So this is a picture in progress picture of the very first. Well, actually, I did one in grad school, but when I got back to Seattle, there's a really interesting space called Tsuyama Space up there that is actually adjacent to an architect or part of an architecture office, but it's a room at least this big and twice as high that's devoted to, well, it's now devoted to installations of, hang on. Sorry, I got ahead of myself. Devoted to installations, site-specific installations. I was in the very first show where they gave me, just based on a visit in my studio with a tiny little structure like the first one that you saw, they kind of gave me free rein over on this large wall and let me do whatever I wanted to do. So this image was kind of referencing the cranes on the waterfront and was very complex. It was really fun and kind of scary to go in, because I also worked where the people were actually in the office working, and I was like banging away on this hand, like driving them crazy probably all day long. And then when something didn't work out, I'd create this structure and they'd see it almost all the way built. And then at the end of the day, or like after they left, I'd still have access to the space. And if I didn't like a portion of the piece, I would just tear out all the rubber bands. I'd leave the nails in, but I'd tear out all the rubber bands. So they just saw the evolution of this piece as being like almost done and then completely non-existent, and then almost done and completely non-existent. And then at the end, I finally was happy with it, and it was up for, I don't know, at that time, I think it was up for like 6 months. So once I, wanted more color and just had kind of worked through this more minimal black and white version of these pieces, I turned to tape and started drawing on tape, just in these really, like, I always say I'm on the tortoise path, because like my commitment to my practice is very, very thorough and intense, but my moves are sometimes slow. So this was like a big leap for me. I mean, just taking that stuff from painting onto the wall and then onto the wall in quasi 3 dimensions. And I started painting tape, pinning it up to the wall, and then messing with the actually painted, like that yellow part on the bottom part of this image is kind of a highlight, or like paint, just painted directly onto the wall according to where that particular light was creating that shadow. And then again, at the same time, I became fascinated with the man-made aspects of my landscape, and this led to what, in some ways, is an homage to scaffolding. And both London and Seattle were going through a boom period in building, which provided me with a lot of source material in the form of scaffolding. I watched the scaffolding kind of proliferate its way across the landscape of both of these cities, especially Seattle, when I returned. And out, my studio at the time was in a building downtown right next to a lot of .com stuff that was going on. So buildings were being torn down and put up or remodeled or expanded. And often I became attached to the scaffolding structures that would cling to these buildings, and as they grew, and then I'd watch the whole process kind of end up in the scaffolding be discarded, and then oftentimes these much uglier forms, or like these kind of cheesily built buildings, were what was left remaining. So I guess that's why I was kind of calling it an homage to scaffolding. I was also thinking of conceptually of how that, like, I was trying to come to terms with that sort of rampant expansion that was also really shifting the nature of the city. I remember at that time watching, I think it was I was watching a Simpsons episode where and this all of this stuff seemed very relevant, or like every time I looked into popular culture, I'd find some example of what I was thinking about in terms of this work. And one example was this Simpsons episode where Bart had walked, I can't remember exactly the details, but Bart was like walking into a mall, and he was just trying to get a tattoo, and he'd saved up some money for a tattoo, and he was walking from store to store, and as he walked down the mall, each store like was changing, becoming a Starbucks. And so they finally got to the tattoo parlor, and the guy was like, "You better get it now, because in 5 minutes this is going to be a Starbucks." And I was like sort of feeling that same sensibility about these buildings, and the Borg quality, I called it, which also, like, I mean, I'm not a big Star Trek geek, but I know that there was that sort of cyborg attitude or a pattern of things proliferating and then kind of becoming themselves. Like each individual unit, it only exists as part of this whole bigger structure. So what was powerful to me about this process, aside from like the popular culture aspect of it, was witnessing the transformation that occurred within and around these structures. I began to think about this conceptually and try to create works that resonated the same way but didn't copy that same proliferating aspect. Did I do that? Oh, that's okay. So here's some examples of the type of scaffolding that would occur. And then also just in terms of, you know, throughout my process, always kind of asking a question, you know, getting closer and closer, answering that question, and then another question coming up, like when I spoke about, you know, wondering, like when I had the red tape piece called Supermodel City, which is this guy. You know, the material itself was much more present and dramatic than the shadow that was cast. And then I had the opportunity to do something at the Frye Art Gallery as a commission, where I decided to see if I could also make those structures work and really push that idea of the shadow being more present than the material. So in this case, I painted a really delicate kind of translucent pink color onto the tape, and then the shadow, as you can see, are the darker lines, and those really were adding to this optical effect that would occur. So in terms of working kind of through a system, I did that. I went from this one form of the rubber band just wrapped around like 4 or 6 nails to this proliferation, and then back to thinking about really what I was trying to get after, this essence of transformation. And and kind of shifting the language of my materials. So I ended up, thinking that the key to transformation, it seemed, was getting from one point to the next, whether psychologically or physically or both. So I began to create this series of work that captured or was dealing with the essence of the idea of a portal. I called them rabbit holes, and they began as built structures attached to the wall, so built out of tape and ink at first, and paper. These are the rabbit hole images. And these were shown originally at the Drawing Center in September 2001. And then in Seattle again. And I went from working directly, or pinning and attaching these pieces to the wall, to actually wanting to engage more directly or specifically with the wall. So this was done at Marylhurst College, which is in Portland, or right outside of Portland. And I put these images together to just show that even though the outcome of these pieces is more of a quiet, contemplative, cleaner, minimal experience, I really wanted to show, and I like to show, basically what a mess it takes to kind of get to that place. So this is how I use a lot of Post-it notes. I use a lot of paper and measuring and messing around, basically creating a real mess to kind of get to this end result. And this is a piece that I did for the Northwest Biennial at the Tacoma Art Museum. And they actually had the wall in the basement, but the walls were movable, so they created a studio in the basement for me to come work in, and then they moved it upstairs. But that's another example of the kind of the energy it takes. And that was it finished in the show. So I want to talk about the rabbit holes for a minute and how they got me thinking some more about all the associations with transformation and relationships to place, and the term itself as a marker or of the defining moment in a story like Alice in Wonderland. And this is what brought me back to the mountains, or brought the mountains back to my work, was thinking about the associations of something like that transformation and rabbit hole portals. And I was thinking about the word Wonderland and Alice going through the rabbit hole, and realized that, or remembered that Wonderland is the name of the trail that circumnavigates Mount Rainier in a 120-mile loop. And it was basically staring me right in the face when it wasn't obscured by clouds. So I returned to that as a kind of departure point or reference point for my work. And this is these are cut structures, cut paper drawings that are, this one is about 21 feet wide by 12 feet tall, and made from that fake wood grain contact paper I was talking about. Detail. This was a piece that was drawn with ink. I'm kind of like mapping space, mapping like the psychological space and the geographical space of the landscape with ink, and then cutting out the negative spaces. This is one made out of mylar. And this was back before I have actually used laser cutters and more contemporary technology more recently, but this was back when I did everything with this little scalpel that I bought at a model shop in London when I was in school there. Detail, detail. So as you can see, the pattern in my process is to push and pull, escape and return, kind of always winding up at a different place each time, with the work transformed somehow by the experience. And each each question always begets more questions, and that is something that I really, I think all artists relate to, and it's what keeps it really exciting and fresh, and also can be super frustrating at times because you feel like you've kind of accomplished something or mastered something, and then, you know, if your curiosity continues, then you want to keep going and asking new questions. So, for instance, you know, I kind of went back to wondering, can a drawing on paper, or which these are, so this is, you know, chronologically after the mountain cut structures. You know, can a drawing on paper or a painting on a wall have as much presence as a structure on a wall? And I've been kind of going back and forth asking that question a lot. This is the laser cut steel that's nickel plated and attached to the wall. So you have that called double or nothing, and you have that sort of sense of place positioning between 2 and 3 dimensions that I kind of have always done in my work. And I did an addition of several that were black, white, and this metallic nickel plate. In these pieces, I was really trying to, you know, there's something I love about the ephemeral quality of the cut paper and the immediacy of it, and this is like taking it a step in a different direction by having to kind of map it out beforehand and then have it cut. And these were for commissions for the city of Seattle and one for a library in a town outside of Seattle. But I was really trying to play with this idea and see if I could capture that ephemeral essence within a more solid material like steel or aluminum. And I think, you know, that's why I turned so often to reflection or thinking about light and how light can kind of add or transform a piece and interact with a more solid material to kind of soften it, I guess, in a way. And some of them worked better than others. But in the meantime, I also got to explore working site-specifically in these spaces, doing permanent installations, which was very exciting. And that's cut steel. And so I created a series. This is called Coal Matrix, and the town I did it, the library is in a town that is known for its coal mining history. And I kind of was riffing off the motif of the molecular structure of coal. So let me see I'm not really keeping track of time. So, oh wait, there's a clock up there. Okay, I think we're good. At some point, you know, these questions led me back to the familiar, as I realized that one way to tackle this space between two and 3 dimensions is to create something that could simultaneously act as both, or possibly even more than 2. Or at least occupy the space within. So the Oracle series, which this is Oracle number 1, brings me nearly up to date with my most recent body of work, even though it kind of refers back to the very moment where I took a major departure from painting. I had stopped using rubber bands for nearly a decade, but they were still sort of looking at me or waiting for me to do something with them every once in a while. I just couldn't figure out how to use them in a way that felt fresh until I realized that the little snapshot that I had of one of the very first pieces I did, I just had it in my studio, and I always loved the way that it existed as, it seemed to be more than just a documentation of that piece. It seemed like it existed as a piece itself. So I decided to work with creating, using photography as a medium, which is, as you can kind of see in some of my explorations, I'm pretty, I'll just use whatever material seems to, that the piece seems to require for making the work. And in this case, I guess I just really saw these as a way to explore this place between sculpture and drawing and even photography. I shot these. These are real small. They're 13 by 13 inch silver gelatin prints. So they were shot with a medium format camera and printed in the old-fashioned, selenium tone silver gelatin print way, black and white. And they're actually the group of works that are in the Lumber Room show in Portland right now. But the interesting thing, or one interesting aspect of these, that I guess I did feel this at the time, or that I was playing with the idea of drawing. They are drawings, they are sculptures, but then what would they become as photographs? Because it was important to me that these pieces exist only as themselves, like they're not just documentations of these little structures on the wall. And it's really interesting to see people look at this work or like go up to it and view it, because most people think that it's a drawing because of the quality of that black and white print on that beautiful kind of rag paper. Or I've even seen people, even though they're framed, like go up and try to touch them, like they can actually touch the rubber band that's there, or that it actually is a three-dimensional space. So I did these a couple years ago, and they sort of also, I think, signified an end to something, and then like a beginning of another. I mean, I was almost just sort of, I think I looked at it, looking at it now, I think that I had kind of gone through this 10-year period from 1999, coming out of grad school, to 2009, and I was just sort of bookending it with these pieces. And it allowed me to have some sort of breathing space to continue with these ideas of abstraction and transformation. And I started thinking about their object quality of these, and that really spurred this whole body of recent work, which brings us up to 2011, which is almost current. This work called Hit the North, that was shown in a dual exhibition last January at both PDX Gallery in Portland and Greg Kucera, who also represents me in Seattle. And I'd been thinking about those pieces as almost these monuments to markers of a place in time, as well as like marking my thought process or my art process. And I started actually thinking about what other objects in my life have, still hearkening back to this idea of transformation, what other objects in my life have had that profound of an impact on me. And, whoops, my fault. That was dramatic. Whoa. Okay. So thinking about exploring those objects, like as source material. So I basically, after that 10-year exploration, perhaps was looking and searching for a different aspect of source material, and I, again, turned towards landscape in that rather than these specific references to geography, I started referencing my personal geography. So this work really took, I think, a dramatic autobiographical turn in a different way than my previous work had. And this is a piece, this is a installation shot of, I basically blew up this mixtape, and this mixtape cover, the little, what they call J cards that fit in the mixtapes, was made for me by some friends the night I moved from Seattle to London the first time, so a long time ago. It's actually 25 years old. And I think I was sort of looking back to, both what it got me to where I was at this point, and also just there'd been enough distance. Like, this is an object I carried around with me everywhere for years, and always was fascinated by it. And I think not just as a nostalgia, because I loved it like the instant I had it, but basically representing like a lot that had changed during that time. So that's a piece on paper, that is a work on paper, and then the stump is a carved cedar stump that I actually commissioned from a guy called Bear in a Box that pretty much just carves bears most of the time. But he was excited to work on he just thought it was weird. In fact, when I went to pick it up, he said, "I've got your no run piece." And I said, "Oh, it says no." I said, "Oh my God, it doesn't say no fun. It says no run," which was really going to change it, because that piece is actually lifted directly from a tattoo that somebody very close to me has in honor of a Stooges song from that time, or actually from much earlier than that time. But in terms of looking at my source material for the work that I most recently made, I started drawing these, what I call roadmaps of ideas, and trying to figure out what were the themes that were connecting the things that I was thinking about. And then just we all keep sketchbooks and notebooks, and sometimes as text had been kind of creeping into my work, I realized that although this is just like my own little personal piece that I don't consider like a work to show, it just sits in my studio, it really helped me sort out even kind of finding like a material quality that I was after by just writing these fragments of thoughts down and then organizing them. So these are just some installation shots of the show at Coursera. And I, again, was continuing this idea of mapping space, for instance, but just doing it in a very different way, like a more literal way. The text piece on the wall is called Northwest Field Recording, and I did a whole series of them, and they're all based on, I did a Washington version and an Oregon version, and they're based on place names, and they also refer, because there was like a strong theme with the A side and the B side, there was a strong sort of reference or connection to music in this show, so it kind of emulates a record or an LP in its form, and it's also the place names of sites, basically hikes in the Northwest landscape. And I separated some of them. This is called A-B Mix, that text piece, because it has both kind of the A side and the B side of these place names. And the way that I separated those names were if the aspirational names like Wonderland, Loop Trail, and Enchantments, they all got collected and kind of fit into the category of the A side, and then the B sides were things like Forbidden Peak and Deception Path. And this is just my first foray into doing something with that mixtape. I just painted it on my studio wall and then made another one on paper. And then I started kind of looking at that one little that little object that I like the actual mixtape, the original one, looking at it as a point of departure for other works. And within this body of Hit the North, I was exploring, like through that roadmap of ideas and fragments of ideas that I showed you, it all kind of connected around these three major areas. And one of the themes was abstraction. Another one was rock music or punk rock, and then another one was I feel like was it Rick Perry? I forgot the third department of government. Music. Oh, wilderness, landscape. So wilderness, music, and abstraction were kind of my parameters. Like everything had to sort of fit within those, or reference those categories to kind of make the cut of my own cut for work that if it successfully kind of captured the essence of at least two of those three things, if not all three, then it could kind of remain as part of that body of work. So these pieces here I was really excited about because it was like the first time I took these little moments out of the mixtape, the actual mixtape, like the classic TDK. This was from a TDK tape where it has the noise reduction information and the A side and the B side, and then I added my kind of abstract drawing to these. And then in this, I returned all the way back kind of to finally after 14 years being able to create a painting that I felt was successful. And in this case, it has this, it's called Experts Only, and it's the double black diamond of the sort of sign markers in the wilderness, obviously, but it's also sort of a reference to my own history, kind of like the Bruce Nauman nod to Bruce Nauman with the I Am Paying Attention piece. I was sort of thinking about Ad Reinhardt and other painters that are kind of the godfathers or the fathers of abstraction. And also, maybe possibly that little kind of that reference to the abstraction that's on record covers or the band, like the Black Flag logo or something like that. And this you can hardly see, but this is kind of the white version. So in that there were A sides and B sides, there were also sort of this split. I'm still trying to figure this out for myself, but I seem to always be interested in this sort of duality, whether it's going to be between 2 and 3 dimensions, between man-made and natural landscape, black and white, A side, B side, but it just keeps recurring. And that's just something that I think is, sometimes you don't need to know exactly why you're doing something, but like over the years, your work starts revealing things back to you that, so I'm still thinking about that. And then this is a piece that is called Northwest Mystic, and it's North by Northwest Mystic, and it's the TDK logo just kind of repeated over and over again in this very abstract form. And I was really thinking about my relationship to Seattle and kind of both like the legacy of just being somebody who I grew up there, I was born there, I keep escaping every now and then, but then I always return. And kind of what that means for me, to myself, as in terms of my position on that kind of trajectory of artists who are from there. So I was, when you are, I don't know how much you guys know about the Northwest Mystics, but in Seattle, there were basically like Mark Tobey, or you hear about these guys. I heard about them early on, and you almost didn't hear about anybody else after that, like that ever achieved that kind of level of attention. So this was my conversation with that legacy in terms of like the white writing and the abstraction. And I also it was very excited to explore different materials. This piece is that bike safety reflective fabric on Gore-Tex. So it really changes and alters when you view it from different angles. And I'll just run through, there's only a couple more, but I'll just kind of run through this is an example of the B side. So you have, Spider Gap and Mount Forgotten and Desolation Peak and Cutthroat Pass and Obstruction Point. There's the stump. And my book that Amanda was talking about, which was kind of a companion piece for both of these shows. It tied them together, but also for me was I called it I was basically trying to reveal my source material and be more upfront and open about it. So, for instance, sketches that I did in the studio and these things that I'd always had around that only people who visited my studio ever got to see. I collected the ones that I thought worked together and put them in this very kind of personal autobiographical book of my source material. That's a classic Seattle painted side of a building it's actually, I think it's almost completely obscured, but I captured it right before it was completely done. And that's just that experts only at a different angle. And the last couple slides are the pieces that were included. I did the Oregon version I was talking about at PDX. And as you can see, even though I've shown you pretty much 10-year, 12-year period of work, even though the materials have shifted and my interests have kind of moved back and forth, I found it really, I like the fact that I always kind of end up returning to place. So I thought this was a nice, in terms of mapping my Northwest landscape. So I feel like that's a good place to end this talk. So thank you very much. And if you have questions, please ask anything you'd like to know. Does anybody have any questions? I know I covered a lot of ground. Okay, thank you. Thank you all. Oh, you have a question. Thanks. Mm-hmm. Well, just I guess that I hadn't committed entirely, like when I was talking about the two-dimensional work being the work on paper, and the only three-dimensional work, which I kind of skipped over at the end, is really like the freestanding object of the carved stump or the cast metal piece is what I would consider finally actually committing to like a three-dimensional in the round. So the 2.5 is what I've ended up thinking of all the pieces that are kind of attached to the wall, like they come out from the wall. And I feel like in my attempt or my original idea to be that I was going to be a sculptor, you know, I was thinking, oh, I'm going to create these like Louise Bourgeois, you know, like massive objects that would be in kind of the center of a room. Instead, I just found it much more exciting to kind of access the wall and have this, and that's what I consider that kind of quasi. It's not quite 3 dimensions. I don't know. Maybe you would disagree, or. Well, it seemed like an in-between space, and that is what I end up kind of coming back to over and over again, is that like all the possibilities that are actually available in that in-between space. Not that 3 is better or 2 is better, or even that the 2.5 is better. I just don't know what else to call it, because it ends up getting called installation, but it's not, their wall structures, they just seem like they're not, like they can't commit. It might be the Libra in me. I'm just kind of like, on the one hand, I like the drawing. On the other, I like the sculpture. Okay, so they end up kind of somewhere in the middle. Anybody else? Oh, come on. All right. Well, thank you. You've all been really patient and a great audience. I appreciate you coming. Thanks.